In this episode, you'll hear some sensitive topics. So, with this trigger warning, if you have little ones around, please grab your headphones now.
Fast forward, I went to graduate school. I got a master's in social work, and I also got cancer. And in the experience of that, and almost losing my voice, I had this moment of like initiatory, you know, are you on your right path? And at that point, I had kind of come into a place of running away from what I truly wanted and passion, which is around the arts and theater and writing, and towards like the safe job. I had someone whispering in my ear, you should do the right thing and be safe. And me for trying to follow safety got me sick. And I don't want to
Hmm.
oversimplify it because thyroid cancer is the fastest growing cancer in our country right now, and it's really pervasive. But what it did for me was it gave me this extraordinary gift because it was this absolute initiation and this crossroads where like, who do you want to be in the world? Do you want to play the role of a victim to this, thing that's unexplainable, creates terror and fear and all this stuff? Or is this the escape hatch into another way of living?
Folks, this week's guest is my new friend, Leah Lamb, a sacred storyteller. What did Leah learn from experiencing tidal waves coming at her at various stages of her life? You'll definitely want to tune in to hear Leah's story. Let's cue the intro. Welcome to the Boom Vision Podcast, the show that empowers you to live an enriching life physically, mentally, and spiritually. I am your host, Benjamin Ye, and I created this podcast to give you perspectives on how to strengthen your mindset so that you can build optimal health, create aligned wealth, and connect with your higher self. It's all interconnected. Let's get to work. Welcome back to episode 77 of the Boom Vision Podcast. I'm excited to share today's interview with my new friend, Leah Lamb, who I was introduced through our mutual friend, Rahul Panchal. After meeting Leah and having a session with her to experience her magic, I knew I had to invite her on our show. As a brief background, Leah is a story practitioner who engages story as a tool for healing and transformation. She is supporting the re-emergence of story, being recognized as an ancient healing art that supports the liberation of consciousness and is a tool that can support the expression of our full potential. Leah is the founder of the School for Sacred Storytelling and created the Speak Your Spark program. She was the art and dialogue consultant for the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. Her work as a social worker involved crisis intervention and guiding youth at risk through the wilderness for 7 years. Through her courses, international retreats, and presentation, she explores the relationship between story, earth, spirit, and healing, and how this union impacts our consciousness and capacity to access the unseen world. Leah has toured sacred storytelling ceremonies of up to 200 people around the country and has presented at Pioneers, Hollyhock, Google, among other conferences. Her writing has been published in Spirituality and Health Magazine, Good Magazine, National Geographic News Watch, Fast Company, and Huffington Post. She produces the Green Channel for Al Gore's Current TV and covered the UN climate talks in Paris and Copenhagen. So without further ado, here's Leah. Leah Lamb, welcome to the Boom Vision Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh man, I am so excited to dive right in, Leah. I love to start with your origin story. Love to hear your journey of where it all started for you and how it's led to your current path today.
You know, I grew up on a farm in Vermont in the 70s, like in the early 70s, when they let kids go outside by themselves and just wander around. And I grew up in this field of trust and connection with untamed nature. And that's really where I began. in that untamed way of being. And it had a great impact and influence on my whole life, honestly, getting to have that time as a child, just to run wild in nature and get thrown from horses and find the bones of cats on rocks and when the snow's thawed and you discover what died in the winter, in the spring, and getting to be in relationship to seasons, and change. That was only now do I realize how getting to be in a place that has those kinds of seasons of fall, winter, spring, summer. In Vermont, we had a fifth season, mud season, which is, really kind of prepared me for life, and prepared me for storytelling because just that cycle of beginning, middle, and end, beginning, middle, and end became part of my lived experience of life. And my dad was a veterinarian, and my mom was an artist. And so I grew up with these people that had entrepreneurial, pioneering spirits. And both of my step parents were also very aligned and involved with learning and the arts and social impact and service. And so those, influences were really my foundation. And I was lucky, in the sense that I had parents that supported my creativity. No one said no to me in terms of like expressing my creativity. I know so many people when they're young and they're beginning to find that core essence of themselves. It's like, it's such a massively influential moment. And to have people around you that say yes to your creativity can really affect which path you go on, and so I was really, really lucky in terms of that. My mom spotted my love of theater and writing, and I got to be involved with this. It was Spark, it's still around, School for the Performing Arts, the Richmond community. And part of my, formulation was that I experienced a lot of death when I was really young. And I really want to honor Jerry Cutler Volts, who was the founder of that School for the Performing Arts in Richmond, Virginia, which really saved my life. I was going through a lot of challenges. My parents had divorced. I was moving from state to state every year. Those issues of feeling belonging and feeling self-assured, like they weren't mine. And I found that through the School for Performing Arts. I found that through the expression of theater and community and collaboration and creativity. And during that time, two of the most influential, critical people of my life, which was one of my best friends who I'd met through that school, and the teacher, both committed suicide. And devastating, absolutely, absolutely devastating. And I was also in a high school where, they don't report suicides in the news for many, many reasons, but one of the reasons is, young people, they see all the attention and unformulated brains. It doesn't always compute. And we actually had that happen. We had a series, I think, of over 4 suicides in our school of under 300 people. We had 2 schools, one building, over the course of 3 years. So death is a part of my creation story, and my origin story, in terms of having to face a lot of unexplainable loss at that kind of age. And it also became part of my reality in terms of being in relationship to change. So that was part of it. And I think, again, it gave me this. What happened was because the arts and theater were such a part of my life and a part of giving me my life at that time, that it also gave me a place to explore life when death was happening. And so when Sheila committed suicide and I was in such devastating grief, at 16, I went to my sanctuary, which was writing, to make sense of the world. And I ended up writing a play, and that play ended up getting a place in a new playwriting festival, and I got to experience it on the stage. And so I learned at a really young age the responsibility of storytelling in terms of what you put out in the world will come back. There I was trying to process my grief, and I was putting that grief out into the world. And then people came and they brought their grief back to me. And I realized that, when you tell a story, you're responsible for it. You're responsible for what you put out in the world. And I think that really had such a massive impact on it. Started me down the road of becoming like what I call a conscious creator, really being aware of your impact on the world, and the stories that you tell will shape your experience in the world. So, like for me, I got to go and study theater, and my parents, supported me going straight to New York City, straight out of high school, and I got to study at Neighborhood Playhouse, and worked off Broadway and worked in summer stock, and I learned that that was not my path. Didn't want the world of professional theater, wasn't cut out for a profession that had that much rejection in it. I was way too vulnerable to the world.
Hmm.
But I found something that I was really passionate about, and I found also that there was this energy that was happening in the room, and I could feel it was palpable. And it felt like such a waste when we opened the theater doors and all that energy went away that we created. And I wanted to know, like, how do we harness that energy? Like, how do we utilize all that energy that we just co-created together in this field? And and so those were the questions that were coming at a really young age. I ended up going and I went to Prescott College, and Prescott College was such a gift. It was where you could liberal arts, the environment, and I could make up any degree which I wanted to study. I wanted to combine social justice and environmental protection and the arts, and that school let me do that. And I also discovered wilderness leadership there. And in wilderness leadership, I came back to my relationship with nature because while I had grown up on a farm, I'd never gone camping. I'd never gone past our 40 acres, Um, and I fell in love with the natural world and fell in love what kind of healing could happen there. And I realized that when we were working with youth at risk, and I started working with Outward Bound and all these hardcore youth at risk programs, that there was a third guide in our team, and that was nature. And I was seeing, because I was working in Montana and Utah and in Minnesota, I was noticing how different parts of the land were affecting people in really different ways. And it began my relationship to animism in such a natural way of really seeing the earth as alive and as being a part of our life, not separate. And that's really where I began to learn about storytelling because we'd sit around the fire every day. And there was this sensibility when you're out in the wilderness for, 23 days in a row and you come around the fire every night. There's a culture around listening and not interrupting and believing that when someone opens their mouth to say something, it's because they have something to say and there's a way of being storied. And we don't get that in our modern day information. Get, tell me, give me the information. It's this get culture. And storytelling's about giving, and you give over time. It's like when you feed the ducks, it's one you give them a handful, you don't give them everything at once. So in storytelling is like that. And so I got to find a rhythm, a natural rhythm in my way of being that had a place to be. And I feel like if there's anything I can share about my life that I feel really, really grateful for, is that I feel like I stumbled upon many different places that allowed my essence to reveal. Where if I hadn't gotten to be in those environments, I don't know that I ever would have gotten to know that kind of essence. And I always make that prayer for people that may you stumble upon or find those places where your essence can be revealed. Because when you get to touch your essence, it's just so ecstatic, to get to live in the truth of what you are, and our world isn't necessarily designed for that. So, fast forward, I went to graduate school, I got a master's in social work, and I also got cancer. And in the experience of that and almost losing my voice, I had this moment of like initiatory, you know, are you on your right path? And at that point, I had kind of come into a place of running away from what I truly wanted and passion, which is around the arts and theater and writing, and towards like the safe job. I had someone whispering in my ear, you should do the right thing and be safe. And me for trying to follow safety got me sick, and I don't want to
Hmm.
oversimplify it because thyroid cancer is the fastest growing cancer in our country right now, and it's really pervasive. But what it did for me was it gave me this extraordinary gift because it was this absolute initiation and this crossroads where like, who do you want to be in the world? Do you want to play the role of a victim to this, thing that's unexplainable, creates terror and fear and all this stuff? Or is this the escape hatch into another way of living? And I remember when I was, in the doctor's office, and it's like, and when they gave me that diagnosis, and they told me that they were going to cut across my larynx and I might lose my voice, and it was this huge moment of, it's like my brain, my ego wasn't involved, right? It went into trauma, like it evacuated, right? And maybe that's where I was so lucky in that moment where my ego was not involved, and it created this opening for my like a portal for my soul to come alive, and my soul was like, we're going out the escape hatch of any victim story. And I had experienced a lot of things that I just didn't share right now because they're no longer part of my story that really had given me a lot of experience playing the victim role. And when you're in the victim role a lot, it's really hard to get out because it's like we get patterned and it's like we know the script and it almost becomes automated, and in this moment I had this quick switch of a moment and I was like, I hit the escape hatch and I exited out into this other way of being. And it was really wild because my parents were like, who are you? Like
Mm.
I didn't know who I was either. I found this other way of being. And it involved laughing a lot more and it involved like finding a way to be in joy and happiness with every single doctor that I was ever with. It involved creating a garden. It involved all these different things that brought me much closer to who I was. So, I wouldn't wish the experience on anyone. I really wouldn't. And yet these crises, can be extraordinary moments in life.
Man, I didn't know. And just in hearing you share that story, because there's moments where I feel in the moments of what you're talking, the energy of what you're talking about. And it's like, wow. It's almost like there's these moments, almost like in every decade, where there's like this tsunami of energy that you're riding that wave. And you
Yeah.
come to this inflection point of, well, do I go under so I don't get slammed by this huge wave? Or do I ride this? And it feels like at those moments of the crossroads, there's something intuitively that nudges you one direction and you allow yourself to listen to it,
Mm.
is what I got. Because you can surely respond to external factors of what's happening in life, but there's also this knowing of, wait, I can redirect it how I want to ride this wave.
Mhm.
I do have that choice.
Yeah.
And I feel, one of my takeaways in listening to your story, Leah, is that, even that moments of where you were surrounded by these events of death, of closing of chapters, but I think allowing yourself to sit with it, to digest it, and to express it, that was sort of like your beginning chapters of your storytelling, because by allowing that, you're able to then also receive as you gave.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of processing what you're sharing because I feel like there's this fluidity and energy by allowing yourself to go there. And I
Mm.
feel when people don't allow that for themselves and they keep it in, I feel those trapped emotions, those unexpressed, I mean, they don't, it doesn't mean, out of sight, out of mind. It's going to be either in your body, in your mind, or is occupying some kind of space. And I think there's this healthy way to be able to express that, which
Mhm.
you've done through writing that play. And so I'd love to just kind of understand a little bit more, like, did you know that at such a young age, or is just something you just
No,
naturally
no,
went in,
no.
or
I was just trying to find my life, and I think
yeah.
that's the irony of it is that like that being with the hardest things while engaging a creative process. To me, that's so critical. I feel like, there's so many healers that are coming on board right now. Like we are so lucky to be alive at this time. Like, I mean, I live in California and Hawaii. So I mean, you can't like go through 10 people without, bumping into two people who are showing up to be guides or serve in this time, which is really amazing. I just want to say
Yeah.
it's amazing that so many people are saying, I want to be helpers during this time of transition. We are in such a big time of transition. And the thread that I hold and that I've found is that, because I've had many of things that I've had to deal with and tend to and heal, is that when I take it to the creative process, I can go to therapy and I can figure it all out and I'm super smart and I'll say all the right words, but it doesn't always change the neural pathways and it doesn't always change how the energy lives in me. And what I
Mm,
found when engaging the creative process is that I can go be with death. I can go be with grief. I can go be with illness and crisis and things that are really scary. And when I be with them and engage the creative life force, the creative process, I'm inviting the energy of life itself into myself. So it's life force giving. And I'll also just say if anyone's listening and dealing with traumatic things, really key guidance is that you only do it for 20 minutes at a time. you don't ever go into the depths of something that is raw and could reactivate for more than 20 minutes, because 20 minutes and you're reflecting more than 20 minutes, they found with war veterans that you can re-traumatize and kind of enter into the rabbit hole. So,
Hmm.
but no, I didn't have a clue at the time, what I was doing. I was in that discovery process, and really, I just went to my safe place. And I'd moved around almost every year as a kid, and books and writing were my safe place. So to not just be reading someone else's story, but to be writing my own story became a sanctuary and continued to be.
So the image and download I got just in listening to you is this video in some shape and fashion has been in several social media platforms, but it's this video, for example, you have this glass of like soda, like black soda. And part of healing is if you just put it under a running faucet of water, over time, this thing will change and the water, once it flows in, allows it to come out. And then if you give it its time and space, then eventually it'll be clear water. And the healing isn't instantaneous, but it's going through the process of it. And then I just get that imagery when I'm listening to you in that form of expression, allowing that life force to come in is that water to allow it as you're expressing. And it's almost like dual purpose. It's healing yourself as it is with the how the story touches people and receiving it too.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, I think oftentimes when things happen, whether they're things that, where it's the death of someone or the death of part of ourselves, or maybe there's something that we're ashamed of or embarrassed by or whatever, and there's a part of us that wants to die. And I feel like when we're able to engage a creative process and look at what wants to die, when we're in creativity, we're in that creative life force, and we invite life to live in that place where something just evacuated. And it's really, I don't know, it's been one of the most transformational experiences I've ever gotten to experience in my life. Taking the
Hmm.
hardest experiences, I'll never forget, I learned this trick. I call it the sacred storyteller sumo wrestler flip. And this happened when I had fallen madly in love with this guy, or lust or something, and it was something, I was beholden. And long story short, he ended up sleeping with one of my best friends. And it was like the energy of betrayal had come into my being, and the energy of abandonment was ripping me to shreds. And it was no longer about, I was no longer in the reality of what had happened. I was like deep in this core wounding. And I think that the abandonment wounding is in so many of us, and I couldn't see my way out of it, and I was doing all the right things, and I couldn't get out of the pain body. And I remember at one point, after trying everything, just going and laying like flat on the earth, spread eagle, and like pleading to earth to take what I couldn't hold anymore, but I authentically didn't want to hold and didn't know how to let go. And that piece
Hmm.
of our story of being able to understand that we didn't get into the situation by ourselves, that we are not alone, that people are helpers, but also, Auntie Tree, Grandmother Ocean, you know, Earth Mama, like these are our family relations if we can be with them, and they're part of what makes us storied beings. Like we're missing that part of our story, that we are a part of this union. And I just got to do a beautiful interview with Johnny Maples yesterday, and he was a Native American storyteller from the Northwest, and was really landing that piece in his traditional stories that he grew up with, that aspects of nature were all part of their stories.
Hmm.
And I think that that's part of my story, is that I've been reconnecting to nature my whole life, and each time coming back to, oh, this is part of my story. This connection is part of my story. But anyway, after doing that, the muse inspired me, and she was like, you should try the sumo wrestler flip. And I was like, oh, what's that? Oh, muse. And so I took this character in my story who was the bad guy, the betrayer, whatever, and I flipped him and I recast him the role of master teacher. And I was like, what if this person on the in the soul story? So I take it out of the human dimension. The human dimension, we got to be real with what's happening here. It's like, look, people do things in the human dimension that are not cool, and we can't pretend that that's not that case, and it's like we're relating here, but there's also a bigger story, and there's the story of our soul. And sometimes when we're in these moments of crisis, if we can get out of the myopic momentary experience and get into the grander expression of our soul, we're like, well, what did my soul come here to learn? And oh my God, this man is an incredible teacher to me. And didn't he take one for the team on the other side? Where now he gave me this opportunity to address this deep core wounding that was way beyond him, that was really in my energetic body that now I have access to, that I've never gotten access to before. I've been, stuffing it down my whole life. And now it's here to be revealed. Thank you very much, you know. So it's like it to me, being a sacred storyteller, when we start working from the story of the soul, we get a bigger story. And again, it's like you can't take it into fantasy. The way that it's the potency in it is living in both places at once, understand that we're multidimensional, and how to be in multiple realities at once. And I feel like that's what the world is asking of us now more than ever. That we are
Mm,
exposed to more realities happening at one time than ever. And it's like massive capacity. How do we be with war, in the Middle East, and what's going on in our oceans? And by the way, what's going on in our neighborhood? And by the way, there's a beautiful cat, trying to pet me right now. All of these things happening at once. How do we get to be with all of that? And understanding that maybe one of the best things that we could be doing as storytellers every single day is making sure that while there's so much conflict, that every day we're making sure that we speak the energy of love into the world, that we call forth the energy of joy into the world, that we call for this, the story of grace, or of inspiration, of hope, and how as storytellers, that's that's what people require from us,
mm,
because we're the ones that are consciously aware of the power of our language and the power of our word, and that how we're co-creating reality with every story that we speak. And so many
mm,
people get caught playing a role in someone else's story. And I don't know if that's happened to you. It's happened to me a couple of times. I'm like, wait a second, that's not my role. It's like you just cast me as a role in your story, and I disagree.
mm.
But if you're not in that willful, and that self, determination of this is the role I want to play in my life, it's so easy to get caught up.
Yeah. Leah, you said something earlier that I want to expand a little more. You said that the ability to live in different realities in the same time. Can you share a little bit more for someone that's unfamiliar with those terms or what that means in the most basic sense? What did you mean by that?
So Michael Meade, who's an amazing storyteller in our times and holder of mythic realities, he says that behind this dimension is the mythic dimension. It's sort of like there's a curtain, you know, and you could also just say, okay, well, we have this imagination, so imagine, where do you go when you start imagining things? It's not in the material world, it's in another sphere that actually we can go to the moon, we can go into the ocean, but we can't, like, there's no been deep sea exploration of our imagination. It's still very mysterious. And so it's where we build worlds, it's where we build realities. It's like we're both, all of us that are listening in here are probably in a house or in a car, or wearing headphones, and someone dreamed those things into being. They imagined them, and then they spoke them, and then we began to affect and shape the material world to reflect our imagination.
Hmm.
And so I'm sure that there's many people out there that are talking about 5D worlds and all that. That's not my thing,
Hmm.
but what I do is I do work a lot with the mythic imagination,
Hmm.
and that, I feel like we have this, again, coming back to our essence self. It's like, maybe you're part unicorn, part dragon slayer, part sunflower. It's like we all have these different aspects of ourselves, and they don't always get expressed through the human dimension, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
I don't know if I'm really explaining that very well, but
Well, so my takeaway from what you just shared is that when you think about how an individual taps into their own imagination and own imaginary world, that in of itself is a different reality.
yeah.
And you're doing that while being in this present reality.
Hmm.
So you can really be in those both places.
Hmm.
And one way to even look at it too is if you think about how people are able to manifest and attract certain realities into it, is because they're able to merge what they already see in their minds versus what they want to see how it plays out here.
Yeah.
And so that sort of is probably more of an advanced level of just this understanding that, yeah, there is multiple realities.
Mhm.
Which one do you want to really create? Which one do you want to attract, right?
Mhm.
Versus just what you're only able to see within the four metaphoric walls of the reality you're currently presently in.
Right. I mean, there's an entire unseen realm to us. And, I mean, there's so many old stories that talk about, there was once a time when humans were animals and animals were humans, and anything that you spoke came into being. You know, we think of that as fiction now, but that was another time, and where the human reality and the mythic reality were much closer. They were, and there's been a separation. And there's a whole history around religion and culture and all that stuff that I won't go into because there's other people that are more expert at it. But what I can, the thing where that I understand is that yes, like we are multidimensional and we have aspects of ourselves that we can often feel if given the time and space to express, and some of us have bird energy in us, some of us are part of the ocean, some of us are, have horse energy and we can feel those people, they gallop, right? I saw a woman walk by the other day and I was like, oh my God, she literally like prances like a colt. And it's like sometimes like I really feel like I see these other aspects of people in their humanness really clearly expressed. And I feel like when we get to really have access to the all of ourselves, then
Mm,
in the multidimensionalness of who we are, some people I'm like, you're clearly part fairy, it's so obvious, and and when we get that, we get more access to the truth and all of what we are. And I feel
mm,
like life becomes more fun when we understand just how massive we are.
mm. Leah, so I want to talk a little bit about the inception of this school that you created, which is the School of Sacred Storytelling. So, sacred storytelling, how do you explain that in layman terms, what that is, and what inspired you to create the school?
Part of what inspired me is that part of my journey led me to San Francisco, and I ended up working at Current Television, which was Al Gore's television network. And I ended up producing and hosting the Green Channel there. And I really wanted to tell stories that would influence the world and move us forward in restoration and healing and getting back to balance, AKA saving the world, and while I was in that space, I really believed that if we could just get people the information to move them to inspiration, to motivation, to activation, we'd be okay and we would start turning the needle. And while I was there, I started to feel an inadequacy and a lie in what we were expressing.
Mm,
Because when I was staring at the screen, I was consuming nonstop one bad story about the earth and one bad story about the planet after another. That was it. That was 99% of what I consumed during that time. And yet every time like I went outside and sat with a tree or the forest or underneath the sun, this other reality was present. And I was like, wait a second. People with good intentions are telling a very dangerous story. And I started to see that what we were working with the climate narrative, and just mind you, I am not debating that the world is in crisis, that, human influence on this planet is having devastating impact, and that the happiness and well-being of our future generations are really in a state of wonder right now. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if we're going to leave them a good planet to inherit. And we know that, so I'm not arguing any of that. I just want to be really clear. What I am saying is that the narrative that what we're telling is extremely dangerous and that it's got all these underpinnings. And the thing about story is that story, it's like if you're going to go to France, you got to learn French. You go to Spain, you learn Spanish. And if you want to understand story, you have to understand the language of story, which is through symbol, metaphor, and archetype. And what is metaphor? But it's the language of spirit. So when we start engaging story, like whether or not there's this beautiful quote, and I wish I could remember who said it. It might be Leslie Mormon Go. It says, whether or not you speak the language of story, story speaks you. And so we can tell these stories that on the outside look like they're being told with good intentions. But if you don't understand the mechanism or the tool of what you're working with, you could actually be creating great harm. And so with the climate narrative, there's a story that we have to race to save the planet, which goes against all ancient wisdom. We know that haste makes waste. And we know that, right? All of our rushing around creates so much extra waste, so much, how much food are we throwing away? because we're overproducing and don't have ways good distribution models. So it's like, that people are bad for the planet. There are all these like really, no, we're incredibly innovative. We're stuck in a system of greed that very few are benefiting from. So it's like if we could get to the true story, we would have a more powerful way to live within it. But I think it was in that time when I was like, wait a second, something's wrong. Like if I really want to go to the source of the problem, it's not going to be in the news and information world. It's actually going to be somewhere else. And when I started asking that question, it gave me the get out of jail free card, because I really wanted to have a positive impact. And I thought that news and media were going to be that place. And when I saw that, though, that wasn't actually getting to the source of the problem, that the source of the challenge is actually in our consciousness, and it's in the stories that we tell about ourselves and about the world we live in. It gave me my I called it like the golden brick road to, my true essence, which really lived in storytelling and in being able to speak more truth through myth, through archetype, through symbol, where we can get out of this facts and information, which can clog and static and confuse our mind, and we can get straight to the heart, where we can come back into our relationship of resonance. And that's how storytelling works. We're in a resonance field. And so, kind of coming back to your question of,
Sacred storytelling.
yeah, sacred storytelling.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I went out. But to me, what a sacred storytelling is what are we saying when a story is sacred? Is that we're saying that I see the life in you. I see. So if we understand that a story is an operating mechanism that teaches us how to live in the world and teaches us values and our belief systems and what's possible, and then when we say a sacred story, we're saying, oh, I see the life in you, which means that now I'm collaborating with the unseen world. So when I think of, if we think that our body is a vehicle for the soul, and if we think that a sacred story has a spirit that lives inside of it, and that when we engage a sacred story, we invite the spirit of life itself to live through us. So when we're telling a sacred story, we are in service to life. When you hear a sacred story, you're going to feel wonderful. You're going to feel connected. You're going to feel a sense of belonging. New doorways are going to open. Your creativity is going to get inspired. You're going to want to wake up the next morning and quit coffee and quit smoking, and you're going to want to go jog and run and drink your green juice. And to me, that's a great conflict to the zombie stories, which are running around a lot, which is, these stories that are kind of life force eating. They make you fear, they plant separation, they turn people against each other. And I think as a sacred storyteller, I think it's one of the most powerful tools to have in this time when there's so much information coming at us, to be able just to navigate using this one tool. Is this story, is this narrative bringing us together, serving life, creating belonging, or is it pulling us apart?
Hmm.
And if it's pulling us apart, or if it's othering or separating, as a sacred storyteller, you get to dive in and wonder a little bit more about, where is that story from? What is it in service to? Who is it
Hmm.
created by, and why? Yeah, it's a very simple, easeful tool to use right now.
Yeah. So I'll describe my experience because before this interview, I've had the blessing of having a session with you for sacred storytelling. And the way I would describe it is the way the word that comes into mind is almost like channeling this movie trailer of when you're saying you're channeling the energy in the field. For me, it's like, how does my energy, current energy level, and my soul play in this vision and movie trailer that you're seeing as you're describing what the story and how it's currently unfolding? And in learning and hearing that, it enables me the ability to almost zoom out to understand, hey, how does my soul character play in all of these different perspectives that I might not be able to see if I'm just only seeing with my own two eyes? Because we all have our certain blind spots, but to be able to zoom out to understand what the story is, and then also just checking in to see, does that resonate with my soul? And
Mm,
you allowed that space and permission for me to express that. Because for some people, it can really resonate. And for some others, like, it might not. But it's just giving you a different perspective on how this is currently unfolding and saying, well, knowing this information, I mean, I love that what you're saying. You give information, then you get inspired, then you get motivated, and then really it's about taking action. And it's allowing you to say, well, right now, and with what you are currently, and how I, using my own words, the energy you're emitting, that frequency of it, there is a story right now, but the story can change and is ever changing, but it's just currently in the way you're currently vibrating. This is how it's playing out. How does that feel with you? What comes and what unfolds for you? What comes to the surface of it? And so I'm just sharing with you sort of my own experience with this gift that you have. And I'm hoping by sharing this, people can understand a little bit, better glimpse of what that means, you know?
Thank you.
Yeah.
What we experienced together was what I call a soul story.
Hmm.
And a soul story is it's an ancient form of story divination, and where I read your, I just we sit, as you know, and we do it in prayer. So it's not my ego involved. It's like it's where I get to serve and sit with you in full devotion of your soul, and make this prayer for your life, and listen and call for your soul story. And when that happens, this story, comes and it shows itself. And then I share what I'm seeing through song and story. And that is, it's such a delight to get to be in.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about sacred story, I think of that as that's definitely a sacred story. And then I have a school for sacred storytelling where I help people learn how to tell their own stories. I think that's what,
Hmm.
yeah.
Got it. Got it. So, Leah, I'm curious, when people come to you to have a session with this of their own, like you said, it was soul story. What have you found has been the driving factor of that desire? Is it because they feel like something might be energetically blocking their current path? They're trying to figure out, a way around it. Is it because they want moments of clarity because they might be currently feeling lost? Or what do you find as a recurring prompt that, oh, this would be a great way for them to progress further in their path?
I mean, it's definitely for people who want to understand themselves in a deeper way, and in a more expansive way. I mean, I've had people come and, do them for their birthdays. I've a lot of people come when they're at a threshold moment where like, whoa, things are changing and I need something to anchor into. Every story comes with like yours. Oh my gosh, so many different practices and methods and things that you can apply into your everyday life to anchor in this, what the story is offering. So they oftentimes will receive some guidance or tools that you
Hmm.
can apply to your human life. I was really honored. I've had couples who are getting divorced come in and each give their soul story, which was such a great teaching to me because it gave me this escape out of the ego story of, oh, that's a bad thing. I was like, oh, these poor people, they're getting divorced. And they had me do their soul stories. And and literally I was just reading their fields, and they got to hear each other's story, and they got these stories of liberation, which is as much a surprise to me as to anybody. And it was really, it's a way of getting more support from your guides, from your ancestors, from the unseen realms, in terms of how to understand the journey of your soul and how it's being lived through a human experience. Oftentimes people will, I think the thing that I've found, kind of amazing is that I'll often just put words to something that someone has always felt,
Hmm.
but not be able to put their finger on.
Hmm.
And they were like, yeah, I sensed that, but I didn't have a word for it, I didn't have a name for it. And then someone
Hmm.
who doesn't know them, from Timbuktu, all of a sudden looks at them and they see it, and so it can be really validating in some ways to have your mythos, your mythic expression be revealed.
Yeah. So the I have this question come to me because I feel like I'm a kid in a candy store because it's like, wow, there's so much of the world I don't know. And so I approach it with just this open curiosity. And I'm curious because I'm imagine myself sitting in the audience listening to this interview. And the question that comes up is like, well, what will be the difference between this session of understanding your soul story versus like going to a medium or fortune teller?
Well, I think, one of the big things around, when you go to an elder storyteller, this is so cliche, and the young person goes to the older storyteller and they say, like, give me the answer and tell me what to do. And the storyteller instead gives them a story. And what stories do is they give us access, they're like the vehicle to access our own wisdom, our own inner knowing, and ultimately our own sovereignty. And so what happens is that the story comes through, and when you go to like a divination person, they'll give you a yes, no, do this, do that, because that's what you're asking for. And in this case, what you're asking of me is say, show me what's in the landscape of my unseen world. And so it's like this painting emerges. And then together I stand next to you and we say, well, what do you see? What comes alive for you? What's resonant? What feels good? What doesn't? And then from that, we receive a lot of different ways of seeing your world and how you're living in it and what roles you're playing and the roles that people around you are playing. And then a lot of times also some tools and guidance comes through for how to tend to whatever situation you're tending to.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of, you get more access to the reins of your life, more self-determination, more sovereignty, more tools to understand how you're living in your life.
Yeah. I felt that the image that comes to me, it's almost like I see you sort of like this universal curator, and you're going into people's unique own art gallery, and
Mhm,
you're showing in this room of like, and this is really in the depths of your soul of like, hey, this painting's kind of coming up, these
mhm,
colors or lack
mhm.
of colors, whatever it is. Like, what does that mean?
It's like
And you're
shining the
really
black light, it's like you get to see
right.
this whole other world. You see it one way with just one light, and then you put the black light on and you see this whole other world, and they're both there. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's so much opportunity for transformation when
Mhm.
you allow that curiosity and that information to come in. And I think I feel is helpful is just being able to hold the right space for people to be able to process that.
Yeah. And it's like we're living in a pretty wild times of capitalism, when so many people are being defined by their value, by their work, by what's in their bank account. And that's 1/10 of what we are, or 1/1000th, and we're so much more than that.
Yeah.
And to be able to come into this, to have the space and a way to come in to see the wholeness of who you are, it's pretty fun. It's just
Yeah. So, Leah, how are the different ways that you currently serve your clients?
Yeah, there's three different ways. So I do soul story sessions, which are one-on-one, and sometimes we work for longer bits of time and do integrations and do multiple stories so people can really anchor in what they're tending to. So the School for Sacred Storytelling, we have a couple of different offerings, which one is this year-long program called the Alchemy of Story. And we teach that through 5 different modules, and there's about 20 different guest teachers that come in from around the globe. And to me, this program is really for people who want to have a breakthrough experience in their life of transformation, of really understanding themselves as storied beings, but also how to stand as pillars and guides for other people going through transition times. And so there's 2 different ways you can just come in and learn how to work with story as a tool for healing for yourself, or for those who want to work with it in their professional lives. I also have a certification program,
Mm,
and then I do private coaching. I work with people one-on-one and help people bring their creative visions into fruition,
mm.
and really help them move through whatever creative blocks they have. And I've worked as a producer and creator, and have developed a lot of different kinds of projects over my life. So I love bringing all that experience to people. So
Beautiful.
yeah.
And Leah, do you find that you tend to attract a certain type of people that are going through similar moments in their life? Or is it a wide array of I'm just curious, because we
Yeah,
tend to attract certain
right.
type of energy. And I'm just curious, what have you found over the last couple of years?
It's people who are committed to live life. That's kind
Mm,
of broad. I mean, I've seen so many different kinds of people. I've seen a lot of older women who are like their voice didn't get fully expressed in their life, one way
mm,
or another, and they really want to do that. I've seen a lot of therapists and healers come through because they want to amplify their own capacities and skills. They want more tools and techniques.
mm,
Um, I've had journalists come through who want to just get like reawaken their creative spark and think of new ways of telling stories. But in general, I think the people that come in, and there's men that come through, not as many. It's definitely more women than men, but there's a level of attunement and desire to live in a sense of connection and understanding that story is one of the most key tools that we have as humans that keep us connected to our humanity.
mm.
And to me, it's like this, like storytelling should be one of like the first skills that we learn, because when you really understand storytelling, it's like humaning 101. You have to learn how to listen. Every great storyteller is a listener first. It's an act of service and devotion to tell a story, because by the time you come to the threshold of a story, you're giving it away. It's no
Mm,
longer yours. So who you've had to become to understand that your life is of value and meaningful, and that it's a gift that can be given and shared, like what you have to do to get to that place, and then to be able to give that gift, because and then when we give it to someone else, they feel it, and
mm,
we all know that you're like, oh my God, that person stood with so much confidence and clarity and humor and fun, and they got through that. I can get through mine too, and there's this transfer of energy that happens through us. So this is why I'm not the best marketer, because I can't tell you like the six bullet points of, who comes in my niche audience. But what I can tell
yeah.
you feels like in the room is that it's people who are committed to being the best versions of themselves and are looking for ways to find and identify and liberate that part of themselves, and
Yeah.
understand that creativity is our human birthright. It's like we are creators, and that so many of our people in our world don't have the opportunities and places to get to know that part of themselves and to touch that part of their humanity. And so
Mm,
when we have AI coming in and like fulfilling all these aspects of creativity, you're like, wait a second, hold the phone. That's your life force. It's like, I mean, there's many ways that we can work with AI and it's cool and great and whatever, but like, I think that, making sure that we stay in touch with our relationship as being creators is really, really a bigger gift to future generations than we can even imagine as we're standing here at this crossroads.
yeah. Leah, so I have two more questions for you. The question I always ask my guests is if the DeLorean was real and time machine was a possibility where you can travel back in time at any given moment in your life and to be able to share something with your younger self. My question to you would be, what point in your life would you travel back to, and what message would you share with your younger self?
Hmm. I remember being probably like 10 or 11, and I was going through a really, really, really hard time. I didn't know if I wanted to be here. And and I think I'd go back to that part of myself and I would tell her that this world is so beautiful, and that there is so much love and play and delight awaiting you, and that these hard times would one day like actually give you the key to understanding your power in the world. And I think I would, yeah, go back there.
I'm observing this as you're saying, and it feels like giving yourself that hug too allows that completion of that message. I felt that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, Leah, where can our listeners find you?
Well, there's leahlamb.com, which is there's a school for sacred storytelling.com. I'm less active on social media these days. It's become a stranger place, but I'm in all the places. Just not playing there this often anymore. And info@leahlamb.com will get an email straight to me. And
Beautiful. And I'll include all your information in the show notes, so I'll make it very easily accessible for our audience to find you. And Leah, I understand you have one of the workshops coming up soon. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
sure. I mean, that's the alchemy of story.
Hmm.
And so we have a course coming up in June, which is called the Story of Ceremony. And then we also have another course coming up in July, which is really understanding, gosh, your origin stories. You asked me my origin story. And so we're going that, but we're also looking at lineage stories where we're looking at, creation stories, and we'll be playing with our personal mythos also in that course. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, they're both coming up. They're 3.5-day creative intensives. And the reason why I like doing these intensives is because we get to kind of step out of time together and really allow all the different exercises and ways that we're coming into our story, get to like anchor into our system, so that when you're done, you actually get to walk with a different story in the world. And that's fun. It's pretty fun.
Awesome. Leah, is there a question I didn't ask today that you wish I did as we're wrapping up for today's interview?
I always ask people that question too, and I think it was such a beautiful interview.
Thank
You
you.
you called out so much depth and presence, and your listening called out different parts of me that don't always show up. And so I
Hmm.
really appreciate the way that you hold the space and your intention for calling out each of our gifts. Like I really feel it. So
Yeah,
thank
I felt that. Thank you. From one storyteller to another, I get that. And I want to acknowledge you too that, man, it's such a beautiful gift that you have that you're expressing and giving and helping people to strengthen. And I appreciate you being able to share this gift with everyone. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very
thank
grateful.
you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. You know, I just feel you inspired me to share a quote by John Steinbeck, which he said, you know, your storyteller must be about your readers or it will not last.
Mm,
And you know what you were just saying, that like when we can understand ourselves and ourselves as part of the universal experience, and we can share that part of our life in that way, it stops just being about ourselves and it starts being about all of us. And now we're cooking with fire.
yeah. Oh, so
Yeah.
great. Leah, thank you so much. And whatever I can do to amplify your light, please let me know.
Oh, thank
It's
you.
such a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Likewise. Likewise. Such a pleasure. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this interview with Leah today. If there's a quote I can share that is inspired from what I learned in today's interview, it's this: there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. This quote was by Maya Angelou. I hope today's interview inspires you to share your story, your gift, your voice. If you haven't already, I invite you to hit that subscribe button to this Boom Vision podcast if you are ready to thrive together mentally, physically, and spiritually. Until next time, folks, be kind to yourself, be in delight, be you. Thank you so much for tuning in to my Boom Vision podcast. If you'd like to find out more about me and this podcast, head over to benjaminyeh.com. That's spelled BenjaminYeh.com. If you haven't already, click subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.